Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. My name is Gabe Keller Flores. I'm the operations manager here and occasional teacher. So I'm here filling in for Mark. He's in New Jersey with Win for a family event. So I'm really happy to be here with everyone this morning. So even as people are arriving, we can settle into our meditation posture. It's always an interesting transition going from moving and being active to meditation time. So partly it's the settling of the body, letting things settle. You can have your eyes closed or you can have them open, gazing in front of you at a neutral spot. And we're looking for a balance of uprightness. We could think of that as sitting in a dignified way, sort of sitting in our center, sitting from a central axis, balanced, not leaning forward or back or to the left or to the right. So really right in the middle of our experience. And at the same time, we're remembering that it's okay to relax. It's okay to put aside what's agitating, what's complicating, and come back to the present moment, the body sitting, sounds being known, sensations in the body being known, temperature on the skin being known. So in a way, we're making peace with the way things are for us right now. This morning, this body, this mind and heart. We're coming into contact with the way things are, and we're exploring whether it's possible to have a peaceful relationship as much as possible with this direct experience, feeling like this in the body and the mind. And even if there's unpleasant physical sensations or emotional stuff, is there a way for the heart and mind to have a more peaceful relationship? And to help us cultivate this kind of relationship, we can take up a meditation object, primary object, sensations of sitting, the touch points where the knees and the butt are making contact with the cushion or chair, the hands, wherever they're placed. These neutral touch points, the whole uprightness of the sitting posture. So we could call this whole body awareness. Is something we can come back to over and over when the mind gets lost in thought, caught up in some drama. We can remember that the body is here and now, sitting, feels like this. And in that connection, we can find this more simple, direct way of being with our experience. not judging, comparing, wondering, planning, but just connecting. And within whole body awareness, we can notice the rhythm of breathing. This is a second option, more specifically, tracking the in and out breaths, however we know that we're breathing. This movement of breath energy throughout the body. Not controlling the breath, but just receiving the sensations, the energy. Maybe we can sense it as a soothing rhythm. So this is another option. And lastly, the field of hearing. Sounds coming and going, arising and passing in the field of hearing. Not fixating on particular sounds, but resting back in that field, simply allowing sounds to come and go. So whole body awareness, breathing, hearing. You might choose one of these as a way to train the mind to be present, to connect. So using the primary object, if we choose to take one up, as a way to connect to the present moment. You could call it awareness or presence. So we're using it, if it's helpful, as a skillful means to put aside what's not helpful, but just leads us in circles, leads to agitation, and is something to give ourselves to wholeheartedly, not trying to make something happen, but giving the fullness of our attention to receive whatever's already here to be known. So we're not creating anything, we're just tuning our attention. Oh yeah, there is a body and it feels like this. There is the sensations, the energy of breathing, and we catch the next in-breath or out-breath and receive it, feel it. Or there is this field of hearing happening on its own, sounds arising and passing, and I can relax and receive those sounds. So even if we choose to train with the primary object, we can remember to relax and to practice a receptivity that helps us be present. So let's continue in silence for some time.
Hungry. And
for the last few minutes of the meditation, if you've been practicing with the primary object, you might want to experiment emphasizing more the awareness and the continuity of awareness and less of a focus on the primary object. Primary object can still be there, but we're more interested in the fact that awareness is happening, whatever awareness is aware of, and this continuity of interest in being aware. And the effortlessness of awareness, receiving whatever's being known. Sitting right in the middle of our experience, not pushing anything away or holding on to anything. Noticing that awareness reflects whatever's being known. You can even practice with your eyes open if they've been closed, receiving sight, but staying right in the middle of your experience. And then in your own time, transitioning, beginning to move the body. And we can end our formal meditation. I'll bow to you, and you can bow if you'd like, no pressure. It's just a way to symbolize a respect for our practice. So we'll take a minute or two. If people want to stretch, feel free to do that. My foot fell asleep. I'm going to try not to fall over here. So thanks again for being here, everyone, and for practicing together. It's really a joy to be in community. Yeah, I don't think we should take it for granted that however many people are here this morning, that we value awareness and this cultivation of an interest in our direct experience enough to put aside time to come and practice together and to hear the teachings from our Buddhist tradition, because it's not an obvious thing that this is valuable. I think we just need to look at the world to see what we in general, society, values, to know that this kind of direct looking at our own, it's okay, at our own minds in order to understand something deeply about the mind is not the highest value, generally speaking. So I think we can really this could be a cause for happiness and even gratitude for us just to reflect on our good fortune to have come across the teachings, to have a community to practice with, and that these teachings, have been passed down for over 2,500 years, that even though they're ancient in a way, they still are so applicable, so direct, so useful, really. It's one of the things I love about the teachings of early Buddhism is this really pragmatic emphasis. Basically, as the Buddha said, he teaches one thing, stress and the end of stress, or suffering and the end of suffering. This word dukkha can be translated as suffering or stress or dis-ease, just being slightly off. It can be more gross and obvious and intense, and it can just be, slight discomfort, slight not feeling quite settled. But when we're sensitive, we feel that, and we want to be free of it. This is kind of one of our core human wishes, I think, and I don't think it's just a selfish pursuit either, because the Buddha many times in many different ways pointed to the ways in which when we're agitated, when we're not at ease, when we're disturbed, and we don't understand the source of that disturbance, we just flail, we act out in different ways, whether it's more obvious or aggressive or more shutting down, but that this has an impact on our world. And so we can think of our practice and be motivated to practice, to look at our minds, to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of our minds, because it frees us from being in denial about our minds and the ways they're conditioned, ways they are. And so we're more knowledgeable, and with that knowledge we can be more careful, in our relationships, with our actions. So it's really a motivation of wishing well, wishing for the benefit of ourselves and others. The Buddha said of different motivations. You could be just motivated for your own, take care of yourself. You could just be motivated to take care of others. But the best motivation, according to the Buddha, is to want to take care of ourselves and others. And knowing how our minds work and how we, get activated, and how we can cultivate the best part of our minds is really a gift. And it takes care of ourselves and takes care of others. So one way I want to talk about just really the core of our practice, of mindfulness practice this morning, is with this phrase of being real. And it's not, it's a modern phrase, but I think there's many ways in which the traditional teachings can, maybe be illuminated by this concept of being real. And obviously there's an aspect of truthfulness to it, just being truthful with our words and our actions, not trying to deceive others, which, can really go a long way towards feeling settled in ourselves and towards having, relationships where people trust us. So there's that kind of outward aspect of it, which, we could talk about for a long time as well, just the gradations of being truthful. But, and there's, in the tradition, there's different qualities we should have with our speech. One of them is truthfulness, but there's also wishing well and saying things at the right time. So I won't go too much into all of that, but it's obviously a really important place for practice in our speech. But there's also being real with our own perceptions and how we orient, just in our own minds. And a lot of practice and mindfulness practice is really aimed towards, sitting and being real with our own experience and what can we really know for ourselves, and to kind of illuminate how often what we're experiencing, what we're living in, is what we could call stories that can seem so real, in the sense of sort of ultimately real, stories about myself, who I am, stories about you, who you are. that may or may not be true. They're conditioned. And so in really coming close to our direct experience, the idea is we can touch into aspects of our experience that we can know more fully and deeply for ourselves. Oh, this is the way it is. And we might put words to that, we might understand that conceptually later, but it's something that we're seeing directly. And this is really the source of kind of confidence and insight, is when we see things for ourselves in our direct experience. And to know the difference between, what we speculate and think, just infer, and what we see directly, I think it's just a skill that develops over time through practice. And we should probably always just have some humility that we're maybe not seeing things completely clearly, because our minds aren't blank slates. They're conditioned by a lot of things, but in Buddhism we emphasize conditioned by greed. So looking at the world with the idea of what can I get from it, conditioned by aversion, looking at the world, ourselves, with the idea of what can I avoid, what don't I like, and conditioned by delusion, which is taking it personally, that it's all about me, somehow the world is about me, and all sorts of other delusion, just ways that we misperceive. One of them being that we think relating with greed and aversion, relating in this self-centered way, is going to lead to happiness. So it's a hopeful, I think, teaching and an empowering teaching. The Buddha, even though there's a lot of teachings and it can get kind of heady, there's a lot of lists and all of that, but really the practice is one of direct experience. It's not in a book. It's, we read books or we come to talks in order to maybe get inspired or some clarity about where to look and how to look at our own direct experience. But that's really what we're studying, is our own direct experience. And the Buddha made that point again in many different ways. Just emphasizing that the source of sort of knowledge in his teaching, it doesn't come from relying on external sources, but really from what we can know for ourselves. Which I think is kind of radical. Because especially when we start practicing too, we see how often our minds get things wrong. So it's not that we're assuming that what we know, everything we've learned in our life, taken in from culture, family, society, that all that is right. It's more that it's pointing to a capacity that our minds have with mindfulness to look at things in a fresh way that actually challenges all the ways that we've sort of built these stories and superstructures, which again, it's not that it's bad. We need stories to navigate life. But in terms of understanding something deeply about the ways that our hearts get caught up, it can be helpful and really liberating to have these, to be able to look at our experience in this direct moment-to-moment way, with an emphasis on stress and the end of stress. What does that feel like? So again, the body is really emphasized, mindfulness of the body, because it sort of speaks its own language. If right now, instead of listening to me, we were all to just tune into our own bodies and really give them full attention, we would probably could learn a lot. And that we could then express in words, but it would be telling us, things like, tension and stress and relaxation and ease and contraction. So, this, in a way, that's why the body is kind of our first friend, our first support in mindfulness practice, because it helps us get beneath that level that we're just so habituated to of me, my life, my story, to a more elemental level in which kind of in real time we're observing how conditions lead on to other conditions, which is more the story of Buddhism. If there's a story, it's sort of things happen because of other things. And suffering is one of those things that happens because of other things. It's not a given. It's not a, it's not just the way it is in the sense of, yeah, that's something that is eternal or, an ultimate truth. It's an experience that we have given certain conditions. And so this is really where the interest, the curiosity can come in. And that's what the Buddha was motivated by, seeing the breadth and the depth of suffering and wondering, does it have to be this way? Or is there a way to be free from this suffering, given, just the reality of the way things are, not denying that we get old, get sick, but does the heart have to be burdened by, having a human body, having human relationships, responsibilities? So this is a profound question. And it's interesting with, a profound question like that, which a lot of people probably have tried to answer over the millennia, kind of, how to be happy. That again, from that question, the Buddha was motivated and directs us to look at our own direct experience and not at views and philosophies about that. Having even a Buddhist take, you could be really convinced that clinging is the source of suffering. And maybe that would be helpful to look at your own practice. But you could also cling to it. And if other people say something else, then you could, want to convince them. So it's really, the teachings are just meant to point us again to our own direct experience, to be interested in it. So being real with our own direct experience, we sort of start by looking at what can we know. And one of the classic ways of looking at what we can know directly for ourselves is the 6 sense spheres. So we can all know without a shred of doubt, I'm guessing, physical sensations in the body. Again, how we might put words to that, how we might experience that might be different. But, if our, sense faculty, touch faculty is working, that's something we can know. Similarly for the other 4 physical senses. And then there's this mind thing, which we can also know. And often we're not aware of the activity of the mind as a present moment happening. We're more kind of lost in the content. But we all, we can talk about the mind, we can talk about thoughts, emotions. We have these shared words because this is part of our experience. So these are the 6 senses, the 5 physical senses and the mind. And this is it. This is what we experience. And that, again, it's not a philosophical statement to say there's no external world or something like that. It's a subjective experience that when I'm honest, when I'm really curious about the nature of my experience in this really direct way, this is a map that may be useful. This is what you're experiencing. Check it out. Does that make sense? Does that help you see your experience in a radically different way than the way you're used to seeing it, which again tends to be this self-story. And it's not even saying that is bad, but it's just saying in terms of this particular aim of understanding how the heart gets caught up in ways that are stressful, check out what it's like to experience what's happening as these 6 things arising, being known. A thought arises, passes, an emotion arises, is known. It's emotions are a combination of physical sensation. There's probably some thought. So, and you might just get a sense, even me just sort of narrating that, of a kind of coolness that's very different from, my anger or, but seeing things, oh yeah, these building blocks of our experience. And this is really, it's simple. It's for anyone who's been here for some time, it's not new. And yet it's the hardest thing in the world to train our minds to abide in that kind of contemplation, just because it's so, we're so habituated and we're so reinforced. And just the truth is we need to operate in terms of our stories, to be social beings and all of that. The question isn't that, that's wrong or that we don't have to do that. But the question is, is there part of us that's also interested whenever we have the opportunity, like meditation practice, to come down to a more direct investigation of our experience. And what we might find there and what we might not find. And that's one of, it's more about what we don't find. Because in those 6 things, that is the all, the Buddha would call it, that's the all, that's your experience. What's missing is the stressful source of, somebody that this is all happening to, that owns all of this. And it's not, and that doesn't discount, that we might be experiencing, some intense emotion or, but that assumption or attribution that it's personal somehow, it's happening to me, that in that context, with that contemplation, whatever sense of, realness, of drama, of, this is personal, oh, that's this being known here and now. And how that, can really change our relationship to experience, and maybe make some space for a more light relationship to all that. And again, it's not that we don't feel all that, or we don't have wisdom and understand, what's skillful, what's not skillful. But in a way, it's, seeing that it's just that. And I think so often our problems arise from when we go a step further and say, that's me. And because it's me, then I no longer have a choice. I have to sort of act on that because it feels so personal. So there's a teaching that is pointing, I think, to this. This is a famous teaching. Many of you have probably heard it, the Bahia Sutta. But this was the Buddha's attempt to give very succinct instructions to somebody who is really, really interested in the liberating teachings, but only had a little bit of time. The Buddha told him that he should train himself so that in the seen, there would only be the seen. In the heard, there would only be the heard. In the sensed, like physical sensation, there would only be the sensed. In the cognized, so in mental activity, there would only be the cognized. And then when training in that way, then when there's only the seen in reference to the seen, only the heard in reference to the heard, only the sensed in reference to the sensed, only the cognized in reference to the cognized, then there's no you in relationship with that. When you are not in relation to that, you are not there. When you are not there, you are not here, not beyond, and not in between the two. This, just this, is the end of suffering. So again, this is a very succinct, kind of enigmatic teaching that many people have interpreted over the years. What I really appreciate about the Buddha, just as an aside, is as his skill as a teacher to adapt the teaching in so many different ways given the context. So this is sort of like, I've got 2 minutes, to summarize, and pointing to the most liberating part of the teaching. So I'm not sure I have too much to add, but but except maybe to point to this less, I think, as a philosophy, which we can get caught up in and debate endlessly. Nature of the self. Do I exist? Don't I exist? What do you mean I don't exist? That makes me feel really strange. But more as like a pointing to a subjective experience we could have. Have we ever had that experience where we're so present with the sensed, and really, so there's nothing besides the sensed with the sensed, or the heard, or the cognized. So we're so with our experience that there's just not space for some self-conscious sort of reflecting back. This is, I think we probably have had that experience. And at least for me, it feels really good because that habitual, stressful thing isn't there. Now, again, we could turn that into a philosophy. Okay, now I just have to not exist or something. But again, the Buddha starts that teaching by saying you should train yourself thus. So it's a training. It's not a view to be believed in. It's a training. So in any moment when we have, supportive enough conditions, but really we want to practice it as best we can, really all the time is the idea, when the mind can remember, oh yeah, what would it be like in this moment? To kind of, sometimes we say, kind of land in our experience. And again, it's not denying any of our experience. It's just knowing it for what it is and seeing the tendency to add something extra. But no, it's just whatever's being known. It's that being known. And see what effect that has. So this is, even though it's a short, pithy teaching, I think it's really pointing to the goal of all of the Buddhist teachings, the end of suffering. So again, it's something to hold lightly and investigate. But so many of the teachings, I think, are just coming at it from slightly different points of view, and I think meant to inspire us. Maybe they remind us of some part of our experience or some experiences that we've had that that then provoke our curiosity. And again, one of the things I like about mindfulness practice and even these deep teachings is some of my experiences, of realizing that I could let something go that I didn't realize was holding on to, or I could be, in my experience in a more full way, in a way that seemed really different. And they not necessarily just have happened in meditation practice. So it's that kind of curiosity and bringing the practice into life, right in the middle of some intense situation. But then we're curious, is this just this being known, this intense feeling, this, and how that can actually really support us in being real, being grounded. We might think that it would make us not accountable or just, in our heads, but it's all this pointing to what can we actually know. In this way, I think there's some overlap with things like nonviolent communication, where you're really speaking from your subjective experience instead of extrapolating, like, you always do this because you're a jerk. But you're just saying, when this happens, when you do this, it affects me this way because I value this. That's sort of one of the frames in nonviolent communication. So this is the same sort of intention, to really be real about what can we know. And I think one of the things that maybe is scary about it, or that why we don't do it, is because we might find we don't know a lot, or we know a lot less than we actually think in terms of, what can we really know? And it's, we can know that it's like this. And taking that as a refuge, as a place of ground, is really not our habit. Our habit is to look for, a plan generally, or just some abstraction from our life. We have the raw data of our life, but we don't quite trust that as a place to really land and ground. We're much more comfortable with an abstraction, and to some degree, maybe we need that. But in moments where we feel comfortable enough, we can practice, what would it be like to relate to my life in this more direct way? It's not that I can't take up that abstraction later when I need it, when I need to talk to someone, when I need to report to work, or whatever it might be, but the kind of aliveness that we feel when we're relating to things, from that really subjective place, how they feel. So much of it is how it feels. At the end of our life, we might feel really great for the list of accomplishments we've had. But one of the things I like about the Buddha's emphasis on suffering and the end of suffering is I feel it's really pointing to this aspect of ourselves that is always really concerned with how we feel. And just that, do we feel comfortable? Do we feel at ease? Do we feel safe? Do we feel connected? And especially these days, I feel like with technology and AI, it's like AI can do everything we can, but as far as we know, it can't feel. So in some ways, maybe, these strange times we're living in, it's like, just how we value our experience. And again, just for me, some of the most satisfying, valuable feeling moments of my life have been very simple moments of what you could say full presence. And just we don't, I think, appreciate kind of the spectrum of how different it feels to be, completely distracted on the one hand and completely present on the other hand until we've sort of investigated it to some degree. So part of meditation is just sort of sensitizing ourselves since we're so overstimulated for the most part. And then we sort of develop a taste for the happiness of the mind not being agitated. And that can just deepen and deepen. And that's really the process. Maybe speak a bit more about that process. I do think of it as a natural process. The process of kind of having some taste for, you could call it peace, non-agitation, letting go, that feels really different from other kinds of happiness that we experience. And then just that natural inclination that we all have towards peace, towards happiness, sort of leading us onward. There's a teaching I want to share that I think can be helpful in terms of seeing that as a natural process. Because I think that's one of the things that can actually get in our way is maybe for some of us when we've been practicing for a while or putting effort in and maybe getting frustrated that progress as we think of it isn't happening fast enough. But the Buddha seems to have sort of anticipated this tendency of personalizing the process of awakening or moving in the direction of peace, happiness, letting go. So there's this discourse that I like. It's called The Discourse on the Volition Not to be Done. Which is great if we're some of us overdoers. This is the discourse on what you don't have to do. It's great. I mean, you could even maybe feel like a sense of relief because not everything in the process of awakening depends on our willpower. And, this is, we talk about a lot, conditionality. When certain conditions are present, that allows for something else to happen. So that natural unfolding. So I'll just read some of this. Bhikkhus means practitioners. Bhikkhus, for a virtuous person, one whose behavior is virtuous, no volition need be exerted. Let non-regret arise in me. It is natural that non-regret arises in a virtuous person, one whose behavior is virtuous. For one without regret, no volition need be exerted. Let gladness arise in me. It is natural that gladness arises in one without regret. It is natural that joy arises in one who is glad. It is natural that the body becomes tranquil in one whose mind is joyful. It is natural to feel happiness in one whose body is tranquil. It is natural that the mind becomes concentrated in one who feels happiness. It is natural that someone who is concentrated knows and sees things as they are. It is natural that one who knows and sees things as they are is disenchanted and dispassionate. It is natural that one who is disenchanted and dispassionate realizes knowledge and vision of liberation. So the starting point for this chain is a virtuous person. So that may be on this sense of willpower and being somebody when we're seeing things in that more conventional way. That is something we can put effort into. We can do our best to be more careful with our actions and with our speech, knowing that it has real consequences. And the more sensitive we become, the more sensitive we are to those consequences. So in a sense, that's also a natural feedback loop. It's not uncommon for people practicing newer to practice or going on a longer meditation retreat to just recall things they've done in the past that they feel bad about, because in that sensitivity, that can arise. So this is actually good news. It may not feel good, but it's actually leading in the direction of more sensitivity and more care, which ultimately, like this discourse says, the more careful, not in a tight way, but full of care and just recognizing that it really matters. So taking responsibility for our actions and our speech, that leads to more non-regret. Just that feeling in Buddhism, it's called the bliss of blamelessness. To be able to look at our day, our week, our year, and maybe not say, oh, it's impeccable, but that sense of doing one's best, of really having taken in that truth that it matters. And obviously in our complex world, if we're aiming for perfection, for not causing any harm, that could be a trip. But that intention to not want to cause harm and to do what we can and to make effort in that direction is highlighted over and over as a source of happiness. And there's different sort of versions of this chain with different instigating first causes. So I'll just read that list. So another one is restraining oneself through virtue, guarding the sense doors, which as I understand it isn't, sense, not having sense experience, but knowing how sense experience, can activate us in different ways. So being mindful of the sense doors, being mindful of how things impact us, what I listen to, what I take in, how that impacts me. Being endowed with mindfulness and clear awareness. So again, just this reminder, being mindful, practicing mindfulness, practicing clear awareness, being contented, it's an interesting one, and abandoning the hindrances. So recognizing what's unskillful and putting it aside. So that these are things that maybe are a bit more obvious that we can put our efforts into, being aware, trying to let go of what's unskillful and helpful, cultivating the wholesome. So as long as we're doing our best in that arena, then the rest can take care of itself, which is maybe a comforting thought. And I think maybe it also points to the value of appreciating that we're doing, that we're putting in effort and appreciating the fruits. It doesn't have to be perfect again, but it's when we reflect and see, those of us who have been practicing for a while, just how taking that care with our actions, with our speech, how that really saves us a lot of suffering. And that's non-regret, and that leads to happiness, and so on. So we can actively reflect on that and appreciate that. So I just have a few more minutes. I want to read a poem, maybe a few other things. Yeah, I'll read this poem. This is by a Japanese poet, Izumi Shikibu, who lived in the 10th century. It's a famous Dharma poem. Watching the moon at dawn, solitary mid-sky, I knew myself completely, no part left out. I think that kind of captures what I'm trying to communicate around that being real, that there's a wholeness to it. And I don't think we often talk about wholeness in Buddhism, but a teacher I studied with this last year online, Gil Fronsdal, had this whole long piece around wholeness. And as the ways that we often divide up our experience and fixate on different parts of ourselves as ways that we get disconnected from our organic whole. And in that poem, I have a sense of that. So being real, and then in that wholeness, there's a freedom from that division, that way that we either divide ourselves, or this is the part I want to emphasize, or this is the part I want to deny. But just that knew myself completely, no part left out, kind of a peace with whatever this is, what we call ourselves. So I think the kind of question for all of us who are really interested in whatever the Buddhist teachings are pointing to, this freedom that's possible, is to imagine that it's possible right in the middle of our lives, whatever that looks like, for each of us with different conditions. And then out of that sense that this is something that's applicable to me in my life, then just to see what, how that looks, in the middle of our busy lives with our responsibilities, with our conditioning, all different kinds of conditioning, to have some sense of something really valuable, really important, that is accessible in some way, and that isn't to be found in other people's views or teachings, but really, we can use teachings, again, as inspiration, as helping us maybe know how to look and where to look, but then how curious are we about our direct experience? In any moment, we don't have to wait until we're meditating. And and I think with that attitude, then all of life can become, our teacher, and we can learn a lot. So I'll just read one last poem, and then the kids, I think, will be coming in soon to chant or sing for us. And I think this speaks to that sort of inspiration, and in Buddhism it's called samvega, spiritual urgency, which doesn't have to be kind of tight, but this it's empowering, like there's something of value here. My life isn't just, something to get by, to get through, to numb out for, but there's something valuable to be cultivated. That's really the point, is cultivation. So this is called, and it's kind of a fun poem too, it's called The Art of Disappearing by Naomi Shihab Nye, the Palestinian-American poet. When they say, "Don't I know you?" say no. When they invite you to the party, remember what parties are like before answering. Someone telling you in a loud voice they once wrote a poem, greasy sausage balls on a paper plate, then reply. If they say, "We should get together," say why. It's not that you don't love them anymore. You're trying to remember something too important to forget. Trees, the monastery bell at twilight. Tell them you have a new project. It will never be finished. When someone recognizes you in a grocery store, nod briefly and become a cabbage. When someone you haven't seen in 10 years appears at the door, don't start singing him all your new songs. You will never catch up. Walk around feeling like a leaf. Know you could tumble any second. Then decide what to do with your time. I'll read those last 3 lines. Walk around feeling like a leaf. Know you could tumble any second. Then decide what to do with your time. So the kids are here. We'll let them come and sing with us. And Zoom folks, feel free to stick around. I don't know how well you can hear them.